Where there is no guidance, a nation falls. But in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. It's a message first penned in the Torah, Proverbs 11:14. But within the last century, it's taken on an altogether different meaning. Today, that verse is the motto of Mossad, Israel's secretive foreign intelligence agency, and much like Mossad itself, that motto is at the center of Israel's long-term effort to secure its own survival. So in today's video, the first of our Special Operators series, which will continue if people like it, we'll dive into Mossad's unique mission and situation, the shadowy history of the organization, and some of the major operations, successful and failed, that have defined its place in public understanding. Mossad was first established in the aftermath of the Second World War, shortly after the modern state of Israel held its first set of elections and was admitted to the United Nations. Mossad was a successor to the organization known as Haganah, a military commando force made up of Jewish Palestinians, which had defended Jewish settlements before and during World War II. After the war, Haganah had turned to terrorism, specifically a campaign of bombings, in order to resist British attempts to limit Jewish immigration to Palestine. Their success in doing so, as well as later effectiveness in direct confrontations against British and Palestinian forces, meant that when Israel became a state, Haganah already had a controlling influence in its national defense decisions. This situation led Haganah to be dissolved as a private organization and adopted into what would become Israel's military, the Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF. As such, Haganah's intelligence arm evolved into Mossad and two other organizations, Amman and Shin Bet. Much like, for example, the American FBI handles matters of domestic intelligence, while the CIA handles foreign intelligence, Mossad was established to fill the role of foreign intelligence gathering and analysis, as well as covert operations. Amman would pick up responsibility for Israel's military intelligence, while Shin Bet would handle security within Israel. The intelligence environment Mossad entered into was incredibly complex and fast-paced, with the United States and Europe pivoting into a Cold War posture against the Soviet Union and its allies, not to mention a rapidly shifting situation in the Middle East and Asia. The persistent specter of any number of escaped Nazi war criminals fleeing on rat lines toward Latin America, fascist Spain, and the United States further complicated the situation. It would have been a difficult environment for any newly established intelligence agency to force its way into, but given that Mossad was setting up shop while the entire nation of Israel did the same thing, their job was even harder. Under Mossad's first director, Reuven Shiller, the organization largely fought bureaucratic battles for the first year of its existence. It also suffered an early loss in the face of the Middle East when a clumsily organized spy ring in Baghdad was exposed while trying to deal with a series of bombings against Jewish targets in Iraq. But before long, Mossad's second director would whip the organization into real shape. His name was Issa Harel, and he had already been working for years at setting up and reinforcing Israel's Shin Bet organization, which again was responsible for domestic intelligence within Israeli borders. In his 11-year directorship, Harel would take the Mossad from its roots as a wartime resistance network and reshape it into a capable and extremely dangerous global intelligence operation. Aided by brilliant intelligence minds like Malka Braverman, Harel oversaw the creation of a close relationship between Mossad and the CIA and integrated Mossad into the CIA's work against the Soviet Union. He also coordinated regional intelligence networks in the Middle East, including the Trident network, which allied Mossad with pre-revolution Iran, as well as Turkey. Harel was also a controversial figure within Israel, not least because of his tendencies to collect political dirt on various rivals, and he was forced out in 1963 and replaced with a veteran military intelligence officer. Whereas Harel had maintained a heavy focus on human intelligence, his successor, Meir Amit, shaped Mossad in very different ways. Amit's technology-forward approach integrated the installation of computers, a broadening of Mossad's links with foreign intelligence agencies, and a suite of intelligence management techniques learned from the US. Importantly, Amit maintained Harel's emphasis on human intelligence as well, often making direct visits to foreign intelligence leaders. And it was under his guidance that Mossad expanded its tactical arsenal for espionage, not just technologically, but by integrating many elements of spycraft that had previously been lacking. Across all its various directors and administrators, Mossad had gained a reputation for its outsized role as a power player in regional and global affairs. We'll go through some of the agency's most notable operations in a little bit, but taking the group as a whole, it bears looking into some of the tactics and methods that Mossad tends to lean on. Now, unfortunately, we can't continue with too in-depth of a history after the 1980s. The agency is obviously highly secretive, and the vast majority of its inner workings are just not publicized. But based on what we do know, it's got a particularly unique taste among global intelligence agencies, because in addition to intel gathering, cultivation of assets, and general sneaking around that other organizations get up to, Mossad has proven uniquely interested in assassination. Now, it would be difficult to pinpoint any international intelligence organization that isn't known or accused of having engaged in the devil's house call from time to time, but Mossad is especially prolific, especially against targets in the Middle East. Now, in many ways, this speaks to the unique demands of Mossad's mission. Unlike the intelligence agencies of, say, the US, the UK, Russia, or China, Israel is geographically isolated on a relatively small piece of territory surrounded by nations that can very quickly turn from neutral neighbors to bitter enemies. Such a small territory to defend means that a prolonged war with a rival nation or insurgency could very quickly become unsustainable for Israel due to a lack of places to retreat to or escape enemy air power. As a result, the nation has adhered to principles of active defense for a long time. This includes maintenance of a large and well-equipped standing military in the IDF, the specter of unacknowledged nuclear weapons, and, critically, an intelligence apparatus that is willing and able to make preemptive strikes against individuals who they believe might present a national security threat. Investigative journalist Ronan Bergman has described Mossad's assassination protocols as a multi-step process to assess a target's level of threat and identify whether or not that threat profile warrants a targeted killing. Potential targets are either identified via Mossad's internal intelligence collection mechanisms or via referrals from parallel groups like Shin Bet and Amman, or via Israel's spy networks around the world. Once they're identified, it falls to Mossad agents to assess whether the target's threat profile warrants assassination, whether assassination would have any actual tangible benefit for Israel, and if so, well, how to carry out that assassination. For all intents and purposes, Mossad has a nearly unilateral ability to decide which of Israel's perceived enemies rise to the level of assassination. This organization answers exclusively to the Israeli Prime Minister and presents its intelligence findings to the PM directly. Although Mossad and the Prime Minister receive input from the heads of Israel's other intelligence bureaus, the decision on whether or not to carry out an assassination, and in fact to engage in any foreign intelligence operation, lies singularly with the Prime Minister. Once the PM gives the green light, Mossad plans their assassination for weeks or even months before finally carrying it out. Their targets can be anyone from political leaders to scientists, academics, journalists, Arabs, Westerners, other Jews, and lots of Palestinians. In the Middle East, Mossad's operational branch is referred to as Caesarea, which operates mainly in Arab nations using a sprawling network of spies, informants, and cooperating assets. Within this branch, there's a special unit devoted to assassinations and sabotage, Kidon, referring to the Hebrew word for bayonet. Much like other global intelligence agencies, Kidon is largely made up of Israeli military veterans, including experienced special operators. Caesarea, and thus Kidon, parallel organizations like the CIA's Special Activities Center, which, by the way, is an incredibly non-nefarious name for a very, very nefarious thing. Mossad's tally of targeted assassination attempts has risen into the multiple thousands. That's far more than any other Western nation has undertaken since the close of World War II. Taking a broader view, Mossad is structured across several departments: collections, political action and liaison, research, and technology. The collections department oversees most of Mossad's covert operations and undercover missions, including most of its asset cultivation, and it makes up a plurality of Mossad's overall manpower. Around the world, the Collections Department oversees geographical regions and their teams of Mossad officers and agents. The Political Action and Liaison Department oversees collaboration with international intelligence partners, as well as maintaining open lines of communication with countries that don't share formal ties with Israel. The Research Department procures and provides analysis on incoming intelligence across 15 geographical areas, plus a subdivision to discuss weapons of mass destruction, and the Technology Department is responsible for all the gadgets, satellites, and various other spy that Mossad requires in order to operate effectively. The Special Operations Division, including Kedon and another subgroup known as Metzada, carries out assassination, sabotage, and paramilitary operations, while the LAP Department, the Lehama Psychologit Department, oversees psychological warfare operations and propaganda. Equally important are Mossad's external agencies and partner groups, which leverage deep ties with the Jewish community at home and abroad in order to maximize Mossad's potential as an intelligence leader. For example, Libertad Ventures, a venture capital group, was created by Mossad in 2017 and now openly advertises the chance for startup organizations to submit their technology for potential use by the agency. On the human side are the Sayanim, a sprawling network of unpaid Jewish civilians around the world who devote their personal support to Mossad out of loyalty to Israel, often without being Israeli citizens themselves. Their role is to provide logistical support to Mossad operatives whenever possible. For example, an individual Sayan who owns a grocery market or bodega might see to it that an undercover Mossad agent in a safe house receives consistent food supplies without having to go out in public. The Sayanim are multi-generational and widespread across the world, and though their role has been vastly overblown by a wide range of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, individual Sayan can be tremendously helpful to Mossad's operations while easing budgetary strain. Internationally, Mossad's partners include the United States, the UK, and most of Europe, with a breakdown of friends and enemies that largely follows Israel's broader geopolitical profile. But within the Middle East, Mossad has often deeper ties with other governments than the Israeli state itself. And that's no accident. In a region where an overnight coup in one country can lead to a revolution in another, and then a war between a third and fourth country, and a human rights emergency in a fifth, all in the span of a week, Mossad has taken precautions to form robust connections, even with adversarial governments, in order to keep options open for de-escalation of tensions in order to avoid an all-out war that would involve Israel. Okay, so how does one actually go about joining Mossad? These days, the answer is simpler than one might think. A person simply visits the Mossad website and fills out an online application, a path that's likely to bring an applicant into roles involving technology, cyber operations, or organizational administration. When understanding Mossad's recruitment structure, though, it's important to understand the importance of the Israeli Defense Forces, which requires that every Israeli citizen of Jewish, Druze, or Circassian descent serves for at least 2 years and 8 months after they turn 18. Mandatory conscription makes the IDF a valuable feeder organization across much of Israeli society, a way to pick out the best and brightest in a wide range of fields, and it's no different with Mossad. As we mentioned previously, a successful special operations soldier might be recruited into Kedon in order to take part in assassination and sabotage operations, whereas an especially promising intelligence officer within the IDF might be recruited as a handler, or a soldier who learned to operate drones and satellites in the IDF might do the same thing later for Mossad. Historically, though, the organization was far more personal in its recruitment, preferring to solicit referrals for new personnel by relying on its existing staff to refer friends, family, and other trusted associates. Occasionally, Mossad might have sent out vague ads in newspaper classifieds or directly solicited Israelis who had earned a security clearance via the IDF. Walk-ins at Israeli embassies also weren't unheard of, although that option became far less popular after the advent of video cameras, making a walk-in risky, especially in potentially hostile environments. Once a recruit gains acceptance to Mossad, they must be trained for their new role. And while much of Mossad's training regimen is unknown to the public, what we do know suggests a rigorous process that probably includes high failure rates. Upon establishing their candidacy, a recruit must weather a battery of tests and in-depth psychological analysis, including top-to-bottom questioning on every aspect of their personal lives. Recruits then enter into a pre-screening program that includes a range of high-stress exercises and simulations in which they are intentionally kept in the dark about their success or failure and deliberately stressed or made to feel insecure by instructors throughout the program. Recruits who can cope with the fear and anxiety of intelligence work, demonstrate quick thinking and strong interpersonal skills, maintain integrity toward Mossad, and handle the solitary nature of Mossad's agents are moved into a proper training program. Those who can't are asked to head home. As for what awaits those who pass, we can't really say because very little is known about Mossad's training program, and even less is known about the specifics of instruction on a given role within the agency. But what we do expect is that if the pre-screening process is designed to force failure and create high attrition rates, the actual training is probably even more grueling. Now, if we were to go through every Mossad operation that we knew of, we would be here all day, and that's just the small proportion of operations that have made it into public awareness. But we can at least give a quick look at a couple of Mossad's biggest successes as well as a couple of their biggest failures in order to get a quick taste of what the group's operations are like. Of all of Mossad's secret missions, none is as celebrated as the capture of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi who had been one of the chief architects of the Holocaust alongside Reinhard Heydrich. After Eichmann escaped from a detention camp and fled through the Nazi rat lines to Latin America, a group of Holocaust survivors and private Nazi hunters sought to locate him and bring him to justice with the help of Mossad. Much like other Psionim, these Nazi hunters were instrumental in facilitating Mossad's operations, and once the Nazi hunters had found a lead that directed them to Buenos Aires, Argentina, a Mossad team under Malka Braverman took over. After weeks of investigation and surveillance and attempts to work with the German government toward extradition, Mossad eventually captured Eichmann themselves. Eichmann was first interrogated for 9 days at a safe house in Argentina, with one of Mossad's primary goals being to locate the Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele, and then he was sedated and brought back to Israel on a commercial airliner disguised as a sick passenger. Once Israel made it public, the operation rattled Argentina, the United Nations, and the CIA, and other interested parties around the world, but it didn't matter. Eichmann would ultimately be found guilty on 15 counts of crimes against humanity and other major violations, and he was executed by hanging. But it's relatively rare for Mossad to want the world to know about their assassination attempts, and usually the reality is far different. For example, take Palestinian Fadi al-Batsh, who was a member of the nationalist military group Hamas. In a 2018 killing that mirrors the assassination of many dozens of known Hamas members, al-Batsh was assassinated on the streets of Kuala Lumpur by two men on a motorcycle who gunned him down and disappeared into the city. Israel categorically denied involvement with the killing at the same time as allegations began to circulate in Israel that al-Batsh had been working to improve the accuracy of rockets that Hamas launches against Israeli targets. Experts have identified the motorbike attacks as a hallmark of Mossad's teams of assassins, although Mossad would obviously beg to differ. A particularly odd assassination attempt garnered headlines for very different reasons in 1997 when Mossad agents attempted to assassinate a Hamas representative, Khaled Marshall. Disguising themselves as Canadian tourists, the agents injected a toxin into Marshall's body via his ear while Marshall was in Jordan, causing a medical emergency. But those agents would quickly be apprehended by Jordanian authorities and several others trapped in Israel's embassy, causing a hostage crisis. Eventually, the Jordanian government was able to convince Israel to send a doctor and administer an antidote to Marshall in exchange for the Mossad agents' freedom. The fallout from the incident would lead to a number of hits against Mossad's and Israel's standing, including the release of Hamas's founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. In another operation that went perhaps less well than Mossad would have liked, a group of at least 26 Mossad agents were implicated in the 2010 killing of Mahmoud al-Mabhoub, a military commander within Hamas who was suffocated to death in a hotel room in Dubai. Though there has never been direct evidence to link Mossad to the incident, it's believed that al-Mabhoub was tortured and interrogated by a team of agents prior to his death, and information about the suspected agent's international passports has since been released. And finally, a bungled 1954 operation offers a look back on Mossad's early tactics in an attempt to stop an Israeli military officer, Alexander Israel, from selling state secrets to Egypt. Using a female Mossad agent in a so-called honey trap operation, Major Israel was lured into a trap and kidnapped, but eventually overdosed on a plane ride back to his home country after he was given repeated doses of sedatives to try and keep him controlled on the flight. The incident was kept hidden for decades after the fact. And a small number of individual Mossad agents have further distinguished themselves personally in a long series of exceptionally brave and crafty operations in service to Israel. Wolfgang Lotz, a West German working for Mossad, was able to infiltrate Egypt and collect highly detailed information on missile strikes, military installations, and prominent German rocket scientists working for the government. Eli Cohen would infiltrate the highest levels of the Syrian government during the 1960s and was almost made Minister of Defense in Syria while working on Mossad's behalf, providing massive amounts of intelligence before his execution in 1965. Of course, there are no doubt hundreds, if not thousands, of other individual agents who have made similarly major contributions, but Lotz and Cohen are among only a small handful whose identities have become known. In all this, it's important to include the caveat that these are only the operations we know about, and except for a few rare exceptions like the Eichmann trial, the world typically only finds out about these sorts of intelligence operations when they go wrong. It's impossible to confirm, but it stands to reason that Mossad's track record is actually far longer than anything we can access in the public record, and that many of their greatest successes are just completely unknown to us. It's possible that they'll never be known. And that's just how Mossad likes it. As we round into the 2020s, Mossad has begun to establish a much more active profile than in years past. Granted, the organization still very much lives and works in the shadows, and probably that rather not be emerging into the public eye at all, but it's a difficult reality of the digital age that if Mossad wants to keep up its recruitment numbers and get ahead of a constant international flow of information about its missions, then it'll need to share itself more than it's typically done. Its online application portal and modern websites are already stark contrasts with its intentionally murky history, and as time goes on, it's likely that they'll begin shifting more into the public eye while shielding their operations, something like the American CIA. To that end, Mossad recently allowed senior agents to take part in a documentary released in 2018, although after the film's release, many of its subjects took umbrage with what they perceived as its potential to damage Mossad's work. Whether that assessment is accurate or not, it speaks to the deeply held expectation by Mossad that any loss of secrecy is an issue, potentially complicating its attempts to function in a society that demands a level of public visibility. For what it's worth, Mossad's operatives are still hard at work hunting down and eliminating Israel's enemies. Allegedly. In October of 2022, several news organizations alleged that Mossad had attempted to kidnap 2 Palestinian computer scientists, successfully abducting one but failing to prevent the other from escaping. The one who was captured was eventually freed by Malaysian authorities, who later claimed to have uncovered a Mossad cell spying on civilian targets within their country. And in Turkey, a number of suspected agents were identified last December, accused of having been following and tracking Palestinians on Turkish soil. Perhaps to combat this difficult news, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has recently taken to releasing bits and pieces of information on the organization's successes, including descriptions of the massive amounts of intelligence that it's uncovered on the Iranian nuclear program. And looking to the future, Mossad stands alongside the rest of Israel at a fairly difficult crossroads, with its future contingent on the political future that Israel's leaders will choose for it. At the time of writing, Prime Minister Netanyahu and a far-right coalition within the Israeli government appear to be taking steps to significantly change Israel's power structure, and whatever system it decides upon is likely to have at least some impact on how Mossad does its work. And so too does a potential strengthening of ties with Saudi Arabia, a potential increase in tension with Iran over its nuclear program, and the always fractious environment of the Middle East. As for what Mossad does about all of that, we simply can't say, and if Mossad has its way, we'll probably never know. After all, we're talking about an organization that ultimately does not wish to be known in the first place, much less have its inner workings revealed to the world. The one thing that is certain is that as long as Israel continues to weather the turbulence of its geopolitical environment, Mossad is going to endure with it. So long as Mossad exists, then without a doubt its agents will remain on the front lines of intelligence work across the world. And so long as they are there, they will do everything within their power to ensure that the Israeli state perseveres for decades and centuries to come.